In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. It's a really difficult time at the moment. Lots of us are struggling with so much. But one of the good things about this time as a priest is that I've actually got time to not spend time with people face to face, but to ring people up. And that's been quite a useful thing to do. In fact, it's a wonderful thing to do, to have that time. So if you're watching this and you are one of my flock, one of the people I'm likely to get in touch with, and I haven't already, I will almost certainly be in touch. If you've received a phone call from me, you will know that I'm trying to do this. I had a really interesting phone call the other day from somebody who was reading the latest Hilary Mantel book. I said rather cheekily, well, yeah, I didn't really enjoy the first one, and of course, because I know what happens at the end, I'm not sure that I actually want to read the third one as well. And that idea of the spoiler, of knowing what happens at the end, is something that those of you who know me will realise that I've got a problem with. I don't like knowing what is going to happen at the end. And quite clearly with a book about a historical figure, you know how it's going to all work out. However, one of the interesting things about knowing what's going to happen at the end is that sometimes it can be really beneficial. And that's what we're presented with today in the readings that we've heard. The reading that we heard at the Eucharist was the very long Gospel from John chapter 11. And you may like to have it in front of you and have a look at it. And it's the story of the raising of Lazarus. I've actually given the story away. It's the story of the raising of Lazarus. That's how we all know it. We're all familiar with those wonderful scenes from Jesus of Nazareth when Jesus stands in front of the tomb and says, "Lazarus, come forth." And there he comes, wrapped up in his bandages, and he's released, and it's all wonderful. But when you actually look at the story itself, as St. John tells it, it's a different sort of story. Because what is really important in this story are the conversations. There are two sisters, Martha and Mary, and in turn they go to Jesus and they say to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now the first conversation that Jesus has is the conversation with Martha, and then he goes on to the conversation with Mary. The conversation with Mary is a very emotional conversation. He sees that she's weeping, he is deeply moved, and then he is moved to bring Lazarus out of the tomb. And that's where you think the story is actually heading. But actually that's to miss the point, really. Because if you look again at the story, what's really important is the conversation that he has with Martha, the first conversation. She goes to him and she says, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." Identical words to the ones her sister will use in a few moments. But then they have this sort of conversation. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And she, being a good Jew, says, "Well, I know he'll rise again at the resurrection in the last day." But then something wonderful happens, and this is really the most important thing about this story. Jesus says, "Look, I am the resurrection and the life." And those words, "I am the resurrection and the life," are really the most important part of this story. This is the significant moment. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And anyone who lives and believes in me, says Jesus, will never die. And he looks at Martha and he says to her, "Do you believe this?" And she says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the one who is coming into the world." She's not quite there yet, but she's nearly there in this story. And then as it goes on, she has another conversation with Jesus, and she starts to be upset, and he said, "Didn't I tell you?" And yeah. So that's where this story is going, this idea of Jesus being the resurrection and the life. We're looking forward towards Easter, and that's actually the big spoiler of the whole Jesus story. It's impossible to read the stories without knowing that Easter is just a few weeks away. And this year, more than any other year, I need Easter It's not because I have chocolate at the other end of the house that I'm desperate to get my hands on, just in case you're wondering. But it's because I think more than anything else, this year we need to hear Jesus' words, I am the resurrection and the life. We need the Easter joy. This year has been particularly difficult for so many reasons. At the moment, so many of you are at home and you may be sharing this and watching this, and you may have watched the Eucharist that we recorded earlier on. But Jesus, of course, is the same as he's always been. He is the resurrection and the life, and just as with Martha, he comes to us, he stands in front of us and says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. And just as he says to Martha, he says to us, do you believe this? And as with Martha, we respond, yes, Lord, we believe.